I'm 84, and I've been seeing the same doctor for 11 years now. Last spring, he looked up from his clipboard and asked how I was sleeping. I told him the truth, that I wake up some nights at 2 in the morning, lie there listening to the house settle, and sometimes don't drift back for an hour. He reached for his prescription pad before I finished the sentence. I asked him to put it away. I'm not against doctors. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else. But after 84 years, I've learned that there are things a doctor will not tell you to your face. Not because they're hiding them, but because no one taught them either. And the 12 minutes they have with you are already spoken for. I've written some of this down. It's in the Coleman Remedy book. The link is in the description if you want it. But today I want to say these things out loud. 7 of them. The kind you spend a lifetime earning the right to say. If you're over 65 and you've ever walked out of a doctor's office feeling more like a problem to be managed than a person to be heard, stay with me a while. I'd appreciate the company. Hit subscribe if you'd like more of these conversations. And leave a comment below. I read every one, and I genuinely like to know if any of this sounds familiar to you. The morning after my heart attack, 2009, I was 68. A doctor walked me through 5 medications: blood thinner, beta blocker, statin, 2 others I still can't name without looking at the bottles. He was thorough. He had a chart and a good manner, and I nodded at everything because I was a man lying in a hospital bed who was grateful to be breathing. I want to say that plainly. That moment was a gift. But the first truth they don't tell you is this. The system that saves your life at 68 is not the same system that knows how to help you live at 74 or 79 or 84. Keeping a man alive and understanding what being alive means to him are 2 entirely different jobs. Once your numbers stabilize, you become a chart. The chart becomes the whole conversation, and you are somewhere behind it trying to get a word in. I took those 5 medications for 6 months and did everything I was told. The problem was that somewhere in those months I stopped feeling like myself, and nobody asked me about it. My hands developed a tremor I hadn't had before. My appetite went flat. The garden, which Eleanor and I had tended since 1971, started feeling like a chore instead of a calling. I'd go out there at 5:30 the way I always did, stand in the rows between the rosemary and the chamomile, and feel nothing. Like a man standing outside a house he used to live in. Eleanor noticed before I said a word. She was a nurse for 28 years, and she noticed things the way a good engineer notices stress fractures before anything breaks. One evening she set a cup of tea beside me in the workshop and said quietly, "Arthur, what do you actually feel like?" I didn't have a good answer, and that bothered me more than the tremor. The first truth, your symptoms matter even when they can't be measured. The moment someone persuades you that what you're living with is just normal for your age, without first asking who you were before, you have handed over something that isn't easy to reclaim. My father always said, when someone tells you what you're feeling isn't real, it means they can't measure it. Doesn't make it less real. Write that down. It took me most of my life to stop apologizing for what I knew to be true about my own body. It was after 6 months that I took down my father's notebook. Earl Coleman, coal miner, Harlan County, Kentucky. A man who chose his words like a craftsman chooses wood. His grandmother had passed him 200 pages of Appalachian remedy knowledge, and he'd added to it across 50 years. Tinctures, poultices, teas, observations in pencil that have faded now in places. I had kept that notebook on a shelf for decades without understanding what to do with it. After 6 months of tremors and flatness and tiredness, no chart was recording. I sat down at this table and started reading from the beginning. And I thought, maybe I've been looking in the wrong direction. The second truth took me longer to name because it didn't look like a medical problem at first. It felt like just the texture of getting old. It felt like the world. I noticed it first at the pharmacy. A young woman at the counter, pleasant, well-meaning, spoke to me a bit louder than necessary, a touch slower, the particular kindness that is actually a form of erasure. I spent 31 years as a mechanical engineer for the Tennessee Valley Authority. I designed infrastructure systems still holding water today. But I was standing at a pharmacy counter at 80, and none of that made it into the conversation. I noticed it at the doctor's office. I noticed it in the way Daniel, my son, 57, calls every Sunday, would pause before answering certain questions, calculating how much of the real answer I could handle. I love that boy. The pausing bothered me more than he knew. The second truth, loneliness in old age is not self-pity. It is a documented health condition that suppresses immune function, disrupts sleep, raises cortisol, and accelerates cognitive decline. There is no prescription for it and no billing code. Eleanor knew it from nursing. The patients who deteriorated fastest were not always the ones with the worst diagnoses. They were the ones who had been filed away, the ones who stopped feeling like anyone thought their opinion was worth asking for. The loneliness of being quietly sidelined from the world you've spent your life building. Nobody puts that in any pamphlet. But I felt it sitting in that doctor's office, and I felt it at the pharmacy counter, and I felt it in the Sunday phone calls, and I've since heard it described by more viewers of this channel than I can count. I've written about this in the Coleman Remedy book. There's a section on the daily habits that kept me from disappearing into myself after Eleanor passed. Not herbs or tinctures, just the small practical things that cost nothing and that make the difference between a man who is still living and a man who is simply still alive. The link is in the description. The third truth is about sleep, and this one frustrated me for 2 years before I understood it. I started waking at 2 in the morning, not from pain, not from nightmares, just alert in the dark, listening to the house, feeling Eleanor's absence, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. I assumed something was broken. I mentioned it to the doctor. He mentioned a medication. I did not take it. Instead, I did what engineers do. I kept a notepad on the nightstand, wrote down times and durations, paid attention. What I found in my father's notebook, in Eleanor's nursing journal, in the old medical encyclopedias from the 1940s. Waking in the night is not a malfunction invented by old age. Historians call it biphasic sleep, 2 periods of rest with a quiet hour between them, which was standard human sleep for most of recorded history, used for prayer, reading, thinking. It was only when industrial-age factories needed workers at fixed hours that the 8 consecutive hour standard got written into the culture, and the old pattern became a problem in need of a solution. My daddy wrote about it in his notebook. 3 lines in pencil, sometime in the 1950s. Up at 2, read by candle, back to sleep by 4, good rest. He was not recording a symptom. He was describing an ordinary Tuesday. Nobody told me this. Not one doctor in 11 years. 1 note in an old notebook from a coal miner sorted the whole thing. It was Clara who helped me see the larger shape of it. Clara is my granddaughter, Patricia's middle child, 14 years old, carries a book everywhere she goes, asks questions that take a minute to answer properly. She came to stay for a week last summer, and we worked the garden in the mornings together, mostly quiet. One afternoon she sat at this table while I browsed my father's notebook, not looking for anything, just the way you browse a photo album. And she said, without looking up from her own book, "Grandpa, how come you know so many things?" I told her I didn't know very many things. I just knew a few things for a long time. She thought about that and said, "That sounds like more." And I carried that sentence with me for the rest of the day, and for several days after, because she had put her finger, without knowing it, on exactly what the medical system had been dismissing. That a long time with a few true things is worth more than a short time with a great many. The 4th truth. There is a difference between information and experience, and they are not interchangeable. The doctors I have seen have information, enormous amounts of it, earned through years of genuinely hard work. But most of them have had it for 10 or 12 years. I have had mine for 84. And what those years cannot teach from a classroom is what it actually feels like to live in a body that has been through 8 decades of seasons, through a heart attack, through the loss of the person who was the organizing principle of your entire life. Your doctor knows medicine. You know your body. Both of those things are true. Neither one alone is enough. The 5th truth came from the garden itself. 53 years of the same hour, the same rose, the same smell of dark soil in the cold air, before the birds start, before the neighborhood wakes up, before the day makes any demands. The days I skip it, I feel it by afternoon, not because of missed exercise, though that matters too, but because of the sameness of it. The rosemary smells exactly as it smelled in 1978. The routine at 84 is medicine. The body uses the familiar to regulate things no prescription touches. Cortisol, appetite, the background feeling of being yourself. Nobody is going to sell you this in a bottle. That is precisely why they never bring it up. The sixth truth is about food, and I will keep it short because it does not need to be long. At 84, I eat roughly half what I ate at 54. I feel better for it. The body after 70 does not need what it needed at 40. It needs quality, not volume. Food it can identify before it was cooked. That is the whole rule. My father's grandmother could have said this at the kitchen table in 30 seconds. Somewhere between her time and ours, we let people with something to sell us convince us otherwise. At 84, I don't have time for things that don't work. The seventh truth was the last one I learned, and the hardest. Eleanor passed in October of 2019. Congestive heart failure, 76 years old. I had known her for 55 years, married to her for 54. When she was gone, I did what men of my generation do. I kept going. 5:30, the tonic, the garden, the workshop in the evenings. I told myself grief was private and that the days would soften. What I did not do was tell my doctor how I was actually doing. And nobody asked. In 2 full years of follow-up appointments, after Eleanor passed, through the isolation of 2020, through the first winter alone in this house, then the second, not one doctor sat down and said, "Arthur, your wife of 54 years just died. How are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you still talking to people?" Not once. Because I was still standing. Because my numbers were acceptable. Because the chart did not have a column for what a man loses when he loses the person who held the whole shape of his life together. The seventh truth. Grief in old age is not only emotional, it is physiological. It weakens the immune system in measurable ways. It disrupts sleep, appetite, blood pressure, and cardiac rhythm. All documented, rarely mentioned, because it is assumed that old people know how to carry loss. We do, mostly, but carrying something and being slowly flattened by it look the same from the outside. Tell your doctor. Say the words plainly. They can only treat what they know is there. And allow yourself to believe that what you are carrying deserves to be named, even if the only person who names it at first is you. I've written it all down, everything my father knew from those Kentucky mountains, in his own hand, across 200 pages. Everything Eleanor taught me in 28 years of nursing and 54 years of marriage. Everything I've worked out on my own since the doctors were finished with me and I had to start finishing the job myself. The 7 truths, the daily habits, the remedies and the teas, and the questions worth asking. I called it the Coleman Remedy Book. It is not a medical textbook. I am not a doctor, and I never claim to be. It is a letter from a man who has been paying attention for 84 years to anyone trying to stay themselves, stay present, stay in their own life after 70. The link is in the description. Read it the way you'd read a letter from somebody who means what he says and has been around long enough to have earned a little of your time. My daddy used to say, the most expensive cure is the one somebody sells you. Eleanor used to say that the healthiest patients she ever cared for were the ones who hadn't surrendered the right to their own opinion. Not the most compliant, the ones who still asked questions, still pushed back, quietly, with the calm authority of a person who had lived long enough to know their own body. She meant it as a lesson for her patients. I think she was also leaving it for me. I'm still working on both of those. Every single morning at this table. The tonic warming on the stove, the notebook beside me, his handwriting faded now in places, but still perfectly clear where it matters. I sincerely hope you'll stay a while.